So, Trump's whole thing, his art of a deal thing, is about win-wins, isn't it? So it looks like a win-win where Americans can say we got them to more or less do what we want, but we can say we more or less did what we want, and each country can put their own spin on it.
Yeah.
And the only way I can see that happening is if there's still some Huawei presence in the RAN.
Well, what about them doing something like, this is pretty bad for Huawei, but if they said, where things stand at the moment is okay, but you're not allowed to introduce more Huawei equipment.
Right.
And over a period of, say, 10 or 15 years, it has to be phased out. So instead of getting rid of it in one go,
right.
it has to. So then operators...
They could always kick the can down the road.
Yeah, they're complaining about the cost and all this sort of stuff. They can kick it down the road a bit maybe and hope there's a change in the US administration that maybe goes back on things. But it's, I don't know, maybe something like that could happen.
I think the smart one is on some kind of fudge. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We've got continuity this week with the usual suspects. The usual suspects of Jamie and Ian from Light Reading. Yes, I know. The detox is really kicking in now. Anyway, so yeah, you're here. Great,
brilliant.
Yeah. And what are we going to chat about? We're going to start by talking about Open RAN, which isn't quite as dry as it sounds because it has some relevance to sort of more current affairs-y geopolitical stuff, maybe. We're then going to talk about Europe as a organisation that gets involved in telecoms-y matters. And then we're going to conclude by going over to the States and talking about their sort of belated dabbling in convergence. And for any of you that are watching it on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, don't forget that you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, and countless other podcasting platforms. Is that good? Am I good for housekeeping, Pierre?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Okay, we'll just crack on. So one of the reasons O-RAN's come up is, I won't name them, but representatives of Mavenir have been whispering in my ear because at the start of the week, Boris Johnson did a live interview with BBC Breakfast, where they chucked a few questions at him, and one of the things they asked him about was the Huawei situation, because, as I'm sure we've mentioned about 4 million times on this pod, we're coming close to having to make a call as to whether we'll allow them to get involved in our 5G network or not.
Well, which they already are anyway, but...
Well, yes. Continue to be allowed or to proliferate or whatever. But yes, you're right. I mean, technically, by virtue of the fact that they're part of the 4G network, they're part of the 5G network.
Well, and also they have some 5G equipment deployed now.
Right. Well, there we go. Who's that again?
Well, Vodafone and BT are both using them, and Three's using them, even though it's... I don't know if it's... Jamie, has Three launched mobile 5G yet?
The fixed wireless access product has, which is effectively the same. It's just not as far into the field as a mobile service offering.
So they've all got Huawei in the radio.
So, for those who are listening who aren't that familiar, Mavenir is also a player in the sort of infrastructure area, a bit more in the sort of virtualization.
Yeah,
it's
got its hands in all sorts of pies, I think, Mavenir, but it's interested in this specifically because it's trying to be one of the players in the Open RAN community. So Open
that's
RAN
the relevance.
being a kind of effort to try and develop more interoperable gear, basically, using open interfaces.
And remind us why that's a thing. Is it not interoperable?
Yeah, so at the moment in today's RAN networks, so we're told it's not as, even though it's heavily standardised and it's based on commonly agreed technologies and everything, it's not as
and obviously the actual radio itself is totally standardised.
Yeah, and the radio will work. So any RAN should work with any sort of transport network and any kind of core network, but within the RAN, it's very hard to sort of mix and match vendors, basically. You tend to get tied into one system.
So there's a lot of subcomponents within a given bit of sort of
so there are
radio.
all sorts of interfaces that make one sort of set of baseband work with another, which is a bit that does the signal processing, and then your baseband has to sort of connect to the radios themselves. And when you try and sort of, if you're using Ericsson's baseband gear and you were to try and use radios from another supplier, it'd be very, very difficult to do, basically.
And the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone.
And Open RAN is about trying to change that so they can get sort of mix it up a bit.
So
well, this is what Mav and I have been talking about for years, and is the disaggregation of hardware and software. And this is what TIP is about, and all these different initiatives. It's so you can buy off-the-shelf radio equipment, and you can put any software you want on it, and you could buy, Chinese company X and Taiwanese company Y, different components, and they work together. It's just the interlinked software.
Like, to get my head around it, is this the equivalent of like what the PC industry's been like for decades, where you can have one person provide the motherboard, another one does the graphics card?
It does get likened to that.
Yeah.
And I think the incentives are partly, as Jamie says, it's common off-the-shelf hardware, so they're expecting kind of cost reductions on the capital expenditure side with it, and you've got more freedom to. I think the bigger one for me actually is this more freedom to kind of bring new vendors into the mix, and that can kind of trigger innovation, because some of these guys that are doing radios are who are kind of trying to challenge this traditional setup. They're doing them for very specific environments. So
not just general.
It tends to be things very much suitable for rural communities at first. And
the other thing to think about as well is that where do the operators want to spend money? Because where is a network run nowadays? I mean, a network isn't run on hardware; it's run from a software perspective. So they want to buy more niche, more sort of best in breed, as opposed to being sort of like pigeonholed. And if you create off the shelf products on hardware, more money can be spent in these these really intelligent software businesses. You can fund startups because you can integrate them into your network.
Or you could do, as we discussed after that edge computing event we went to, you could decide to go big on the edge. And invest a hell of a lot in that, and get yourself some kind of competitive advantage by being sort of razor sharp on edge networking. So yes, I agree with you. And
the other thing to think about, and I completely agree with anyone who's got the cynical hat on when it comes to Open RAN, it's that it forces traditional players to lower their prices as well. If there's someone coming in and undercutting the sort of an incumbent supplier, the incumbent supplier doesn't want to lose that contract, and it doesn't want money to be rediverted into another company, because success breeds success. So you don't want competition to emerge, because more competition, lower the prices go.
And the commoditization. I don't think it's unfair to say that a lot of big kit vendor margins have been heavily dependent on vendor lock-in historically.
Yes.
And so, let's say you're all in on Ericsson and you need some new gear, they've almost got you as a completely captive market. Because of the immense expense of switching to another one.
I mean, this is why...
It's a bit like being an Apple customer, isn't it, Pierre?
Yeah. I mean, this is why no one can break into the 5G world as it stands, because we've got non-standalone. So basically, you're building 5G on top of 4G, and what are you going to do? Are you going to put, there is theoretically interoperability, but you're just going to put Huawei kit on top of Huawei kit, or like you were saying last week, you take out all the Samsung gear, and you put Huawei at 4G for 3, and then you can put Huawei on top. So non-standalone is causing more competition problems.
So that brings me to an interesting point. Let's say hypothetically, Open RAN was much more advanced and widespread and embedded than it is. I wonder, this is just a speculation, none of you will have the answer, but I wonder, so Trump's going, no Huawei at all. Even a speck of Huawei will completely compromise your entire network.
Well, they're trying to get, on 5G,
Yeah. So if you had Open RAN where you just got bits and bobs, and you've got a baseband from one and a transistor from another or whatever, I wonder what the smallest amount of Huawei they would allow is, and furthermore, how they could possibly know.
Yeah.
Because if people started chopping and changing and just being able to buy smaller bits of kit from a given vendor, it'd be harder to track the whole process, surely.
I mean, this is...
I don't know if they're talking about, say disaggregated, but, you're still going to have...
solutions.
You're still going to have solutions. You're still going to have, like, a company comes and provides your radios. You've got a radio deal with, say, Fujitsu.
You're not just going to go down the shop and stick a Huawei graphics card
and
in
then
there.
maybe Nokia's doing the baseband, and you've got Altia Star figures in this stuff. But it's not like the actual box itself has got 10 or 20 different.
Yeah, fair enough. I hear you.
I mean,
they've all got components in, obviously, that come from all sorts of different companies, and that's really hard to track, which is one of the reasons this whole debate's so crazy and illogical, really, isn't it? Because there's all sorts of componentry in electronic equipment.
Well, and then we've also got the fact that loads of it
that's made in China. A lot
yeah,
of
exactly. It
China.
might be made by a trusted vendor, but it's still made in China.
Or Nokia's doing it. And there was this Bloomberg story that seemed to die pretty quickly, but that whole thing last year about semiconductors being inserted into servers that were assembled in Chinese factories. Remember the Bloomberg scoop, and it apparently went into Amazon and Apple,
which will have been fed to them by the US
probably,
state.
And then people were saying it wasn't true. And
Pierre's got his hand up.
What's he doing?
A bit of a technical difficulty. We're going to have to cut for 1 second.
Okay, all right.
Have we lost all of that?
Stay with us.
Insight.
Right, sorry for that interruption, but our producer. But budgets are tight, and we're stuck with him. So there we go. So we were just talking about Open RAN and Huawei and all that sort of thing. So the reason we got onto it is in this BBC interview that I mentioned at the start. When asked about it, Boris Johnson's he sort of equivocated. It was presumably all quite sort of scripted in advance. He said, "Well, I won't do a Bojo impression, but he's all
that was pretty good though.
Sort of making various. He has to make sort of a bunch of posh noises before he can start talking.
Yeah.
And then once he got them out of his system, he said, "Well, the people telling us to ditch Huawei, they should tell us what the alternatives are."
Yeah.
And obviously, the immediate thought is, well, there's a couple up in Sweden and Finland. Yeah, up in Lapland, next to Santa, who could flog you some kit, and then there's Samsung. Presumably ZTE is not a consideration.
Yeah, that's the same as Huawei, isn't
it? And then there's also as Mavenir's representatives would insist them, and then I'm sure they won't mind me saying it, sort of some second tier players who we think of as a bit more niche, a bit more specialist. But their aspirations...
Well, they're very niche, yeah. They're not really alternatives.
They're not.
I
don't think they're an alternative at
all.
They're not I'd take out not really. I'd say they're not alternatives.
They're not alternatives today.
They're not alternatives.
In a mass market sense, they're not alternatives.
No.
Now, they could, and companies are already doing this. So there's been a few O-RAN announcements this week. I think O2 said it's going to start using O-RAN equipment in some rural communities.
Right.
Up by Q2.
Yeah, so Vodafone's doing the same thing in the UK. It's got tests going on in sort of live production networks, and you've got this came out of the TIP show last year. You've got some stuff happening in bits of South America, but it's a tiny percentage of the overall network. In most cases that O-RAN.
But it could be the thin end of the wedge, couldn't it? Once you prove yourself,
but it's just not ready for rollout on that kind of scale. And there's all sorts of reasons.
I can only name off the top of my head 6 projects, include 6 or 7 projects using
and it always seems to be Vodafone and Telefonica. You've got these two service providers are pushing this a lot.
Right.
One thing that came out of TIP in particular.
MTN are pushing it very heavily as well.
MTN, yeah, that's true. But the big sort of international players are kind of known around the world. The Vodafone and Telefonica are very prominent, and then other companies a lot less so. Even though a lot of them have got behind this O-RAN alliance, which is all about getting the specifications locked down. There's not a lot of signs of them doing much with it.
And it progressing.
And there's all sorts of reasons why it's just not there yet. And, one is the companies, despite what they say, you still can't get software that actually runs on commodity off-the-shelf, x86 servers. It's still not quite there. It's still some kind of customization required.
I see.
It's you talk to people like Gabriel Brown, who's an analyst at Heavy Reading, and he says it's just not... everybody kind of complains about vendor lock-in, all this stuff, but the stuff the 3GPP's done is technically really, really good. It's sort of ahead of where they are on O-RAN in terms of performance specifications at the moment. They're kind of a couple of releases behind. So that's another reason. So, that's why it tends to get talked about in rural settings, outside areas where you're going to need when there's going to be lots of data usage and there's a lot of demands on the network. People aren't really looking to use it there. It tends to be in more sort of rural low kind of demand
Where
environments.
if it screws up, it's only
You
going
know,
to piss off a couple
there's
of sheep.
there's no real market for white box
the
network
other-
equipment. So
That's the other thing that's massively holding it back as well, is that it is sort of like the validation of the technology, as it were. So, I mean, first of all, do you actually know that it works with the rest of your network? That's actually like optimizing the technology. It's still very new, and telcos are really traditional beasts. They don't like playing around with new ideas. So when something goes wrong, like you said, if it's O-RAN, you've got X amount of companies that you have to go to find the problem in your network.
That's a massive issue.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
If for instance, last year O2 had that massive O2 and what was it, SoftBank
I think,
and Viettel in Vietnam, their network went down and it was Ericsson's problem.
Yeah.
So what you do, you go to Ericsson and you say, sort this out. Can't do that.
That's what we pay you for.
Yeah.
Can't do that in an open RAN environment.
Yeah.
And that actually makes me think. So I'm pretty sure. I think Nokia and Ericsson are on the O-RAN Alliance. They're sort of participants to some degree.
Well,
and we always figured
Nokia's been in it for quite a long time,
right?
And Ericsson joined last year.
And we always figured that the main reason they do it is just to keep an eye on stuff.
I mean,
hedging their bets maybe a little bit, but they're just sort of keeping an eye on it.
Opposed to them say that, they want to keep an eye on it.
It seems reasonable. I mean, put yourself in their position.
Yeah.
You might as well keep an eye on it. But one reason.
Well, I think they've probably got very good. I mean, I suspect they have very good O-RAN technology themselves.
Right. Well, I was going to say one reason for them to do it is, even if O-RAN irons out a lot of these little bumps that you were just describing, if they still remain an order of magnitude, their solution is an order of magnitude higher performing and more reliable or whatever, then it doesn't really matter, does it? Because people are still going to go, as Jamie was just saying, for the sake of not having this aggro, they're still going to go with the one-stop shop.
Sure, but there is a big drive behind O-RAN, and that's there for a reason. It's not just,
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, that their defence against O-RAN is just to stay one step ahead of it technologically.
Yeah. Well, this is what Huawei says. When they had a conference, I think in the run about this time of year, in the run up to MWC last year, they have their big sort of pre-MWC event.
Yep.
And
it's literally
I remember
like
asking
the day
them there
before.
why. This was around about the time I think Ericsson had joined as well, and they were sort of conspicuous by their absence from the O-RAN Alliance then. And I remember asking them, and they were like, "Well, we just don't see that it measures up performance-wise and we don't want to send the wrong message out to our customers. If you compare it, what you can get in terms of energy efficiency and bandwidth and all these other sort of metrics, what you can get on the dedicated equipment we're doing compared with what you could get on common off-the-shelf hardware and doing it this sort of O-RAN way, it's just not even, there's no comparison." So they're pretty honest about their reasons for not. Now skeptics would say they don't want to do it because there's something to lose there obviously for them.
Well, it's very hard. I mean, I think generally companies that have a degree of sort of vendor lock-in potential, the only way they're going to explore an open alternative is if they think that's inevitable.
Yeah.
And I think that, that more generally happens. If you look at the history of companies, the only time they go against, like I bet, for example, this is a completely disingenuous comparison, but it just springs to mind. I bet cigarette companies are all the main shareholders in nicotine replacement therapy and vaping companies, because that's hedging. You realise that the macro tide is turning against you. So you think, okay, what direction is the tide going in? Let's get involved in that as well.
Yeah.
So that's the smart thing to do. But I think, unless I've missed something, we haven't reached that tipping point. Excuse the pun. With O-RAN.
Well, I mean, the other big issue with it, I mean, and it's what I mentioned earlier, is that everyone's investing in 5G now. But we haven't got standalone, so you can't actually, properly go gunsling forwards with O-RAN because it's still non-standalone 5G. So you're still reliant on the technology which is in the network already. So a lot of these networks these operators are tied to the legacy systems which are in place. Now, if you look at where all the O-RAN investments are over the last couple of months or, like the last year, let's say. So you look at O2, they're looking at not spot areas and rural connectivity. The same could be said for Vodafone. Now, O2 we're also looking at dense urban environments, but that's for not for small cells, which are adding to network densification, not building on existing sites.
Right.
So they're not tied to not tied as much to legacy technology. And the other massive O-RAN initiative that we haven't brought up is Rakuten over in Japan. Now, what's Rakuten's advantage compared to everyone else? It didn't exist 2 years ago, so it's completely greenfield. Yeah, they can say, if we had a brand new network today, how would we design it perfectly? So they can take that.
That will make sense, and your point about densification makes sense because there's redundancy built in there.
Yeah.
If it screws up, all it is a bit less dense.
But it's the same issue someone faces. It's also about swaps. If you're prepared to do a swap, then you can bring it in. So it's the same. If this is why it's very hard for market share to change with. People building up 5G networks, they tend to stick with their 4G supplier because if you introduce a different 5G supplier, then you have to do a swap.
Do a retroactive.
Especially at the moment. That might change with Release 16, though, with standalone technology emerging.
It might, yeah. But, that's true. There could be an opportunity for more changes there. But at the moment, they have this problem. They can't easily shift. And it does happen. It is happening. You do see companies now coming in and saying we're going to phase out Huawei and we're going to have Ericsson everywhere, or some occasionally the other way around. It's happened a few times in Europe, I think. But
Nokia seems to be getting ditched all over the place as well.
Yeah. So it's just.
So that you'll upset people about Nokia.
So I think if they are going to introduce O-RAN, then they have to be prepared to do a swap. That's true. But I'm not entirely cynical about it. I mean, I think there's a reason why it's come up, and there's a lot of there's some big operators who are talking about it in a very serious way.
Yeah, and you can see
at the top level talking about it now. It's not just the kind of engineers going.
Well, and that's part of that'll be part of the reason why people like Mavenir want us to be having discussions like this, not to necessarily conclude that they're going to kick ass here and now, but to try and insinuate this conversation.
Yeah, it's not going to take the world over in the next 2 years, but
it's going to be like the proprietary technologies are still going to exist because I don't think Open RAN will compete in certain circumstances, but then certain circumstances Open RAN will be part of the mix. I mean, the thing is, it's not robust enough as a technology to even consider stealing significant amounts of market share. And this idea that the senators have been putting forward in the US saying
creating their own
that's a fund,
we're going to spend £1 billion on that. Oh, great, but it's not an alternative. I mean, how many years down the line are we going to be waiting for Open RAN to be a genuine alternative? Can the UK operators wait that long before?
No, but it does need things like that. That's one of the things it needs is fund. I mean, I don't know whether a US public sector fund is the way to do it, but it does need. One of the things it's missing is capital.
Because my gut feel is the US, to the best of my knowledge, or at least it used to be, is by far the richest source of sort of open-minded, patient investment capital in the world. It could be. I mean, I've heard rumours that China's actually overtaking it, and there's more risk-taking going on with VC types there. But you'd think over all these years, there are plenty of opportunities for the US to have got in the game. Yeah. And then we've also got like Cisco and stuff as well. And they haven't.
One that's well worth watching in the US is Dish. If this merger ever goes ahead between T-Mobile and Sprint, and we do get this alternative Dish network as a kind of greenfield opportunity, very much like Rakuten.
They got a 7-year MVNO contract, so they got 7 years to build out, so they can wait for O-RAN to be robust enough.
They've specifically told, like reading, that they want to. This is basically where they see themselves doing it, is with US software companies. So these guys like Altiostar, Parallel Wireless, Mavenir.
I mean, Cisco was massive.
That's who they want to
use.
So.
I mean, this is the one thing where I think that where part of the reason this big fund is going to be accepted is that, once you got rid of Bell Labs, you basically take out any influence that the US has on the RAN market, if that makes sense. You look at the major players, none of them are based in the US. Or even, Bell Labs more on the fixed side, but even on the fixed side, you've only got Ciena there. Yeah. Like the majority of them are European or Asian players. So the US just doesn't have any influence on this segment of the telco market. So if they can get O-RAN up and running, and if they can fund an O-RAN player to be a globally scaled competitor on the market, the US starts to get more influence there.
Yeah, well, and one area in which I'll be less sceptical, if we view a lot of this as part of the broader geopolitical game, which seems to be going on, and so long as Trump's in power or people who share his sentiments are in power, there's likely to be a greater technological balkanization going on, as China does their own thing and America does their own thing, and they try to be as independent of each other in terms of critical infrastructure as possible, then it's a sort of negotiating chip, isn't it? Let's say they chuck £1 billion at some kind of sort of O-RAN ecosystem, and it starts picking up. Then the next time Trump's sitting opposite Xi Jinping, he can go, well, we're doing all right on this one, actually, mate. Your move, son.
Yeah.
So I can see where, while it will take a long time, if ever, for them to get to a level where people would consider it a viable alternative to the big kit vendors, from a geopolitical point of view, it makes a fair bit of sense. And I'll use that as a sort of segue onto the sort of Europe bit, because so Boris Johnson, he basically had two halves to his answer to the question on Huawei. The first one was this, well, then what are the alternatives, which we were just discussing. But then he went, the last thing we want to do is jeopardise our security. And he explicitly mentioned this Five Eyes Alliance, which is US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, where they are sort of Anglophone, I think is the word, isn't it? It's English speaking. Countries all share.
They can understand each other's intelligence.
Yeah, quite.
They have to get translators involved.
We don't have to listen to intelligence. It's like, we discovered this new thing. So they've got this Five Eyes Alliance, and basically Trump and his representatives have been going, well, look, UK, you let Huawei in there, we can't trust you. We can't be sharing intelligence with you, because then you might just be banging on your network. Next thing we know, China's got all our goss. It's got all our juicy secrets.
Yeah.
And so Boris Johnson very explicitly referred to that. So that's why it's a hedging statement that he made. He went, on one hand, what are the alternatives? On the other hand, we don't want to piss off the Americans over intelligence.
Yeah.
And then just now I wrote a story, a guy called Hogan. Was it Paul Hogan?
Phil Hogan, I think.
Phil Hogan. Yeah, Paul Hogan was that Australian from the 80s.
Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah. It would be cool if it was Paul Hogan.
Yeah.
I don't give a
moved from acting into geopolitics and the EU.
And so Phil Hogan, who is an Irish politician who is currently the EU Trade Commissioner, I don't know if it's full stop or just to the US or whatever. He got interviewed by a previous EU Trade Commissioner, Peter Mandelson, a UK politician, and he got asked about this threat about withdrawing from intelligence sharing, and he basically came out really blatantly and went, nah, they're bluffing. Call their bluff. They'll never follow through.
Yeah.
I don't understand where all this is coming from.
Where all what is coming from?
This European politician, or this European bureaucrat, and then also the current head of the MI5, Philip something or other.
He said the same thing.
He's turned around and said, it doesn't matter. It's not. They won't do it.
Yeah.
I don't know where they're getting this confidence from, because
it does seem a bit reckless.
But the US, Tom Cotton, is the senator. He's a Republican senator. Has tabled a bill which explicitly says the US government will not share intelligence with countries with Huawei and the 5G network.
Yeah. To bring it into law. So i.e. beyond
law,
even the discretion of the executive.
Yeah. I mean, even unless I'm massively missing, there's some nuance where the intelligence agencies can ignore the law.
Yeah.
How on earth are they going to get around that?
Yeah, well, although it must be noted that bill hasn't gone through.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything which has been directed towards Huawei before has passed both the houses very, very rapidly.
Yeah. Because if you oppose it, then they'll accuse you of hating America or something like that. Yes, well, I think it's foolhardy, and I thought Hogan used quite a sort of supercilious tone, which is rather typical of Eurocrats to me, where it's all a bit like, look, he's just getting carried away. He'll soon realise that we're right, sort of thing. And the other thing that I think's foolhardy about it is if you look at Trump's MO, it's incredibly sort of mercurial and instinctive and impetuous, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know if the comparison's sort of particularly valid, but I thought after the recent aggression against Iran, they came immediately after the leader of Iran tweeted, "There's nothing you can do, son." And then Trump seemed to then be aggressive almost in response to that tweet. Now, it may not be the case. Obviously, I've got no inside information, but that's how it came over. And now you've got these people going in public going, "No, he's bluffing."
Yeah.
Well, that's the sort of thing where Trump will go, "Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I might have gone easy on you, but now it's personal. Now you've wound me up. Now I'm just going to be vindictive just to show you that I'm the man." So I think these are silly things to do. But, what do I know? And I think so we're still left with Boris Johnson in this tough position. I think there's no doubt that if he decides to greenlight Huawei, there will be diplomatic repercussions from the States.
Yeah.
Having said that, as all people like me, all Brexiteers like me, like to keep reminding everyone, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. Why should we have to constantly worry about appeasing the Americans any more than we should worry about appeasing the continental Europeans?
Or appeasing the Chinese.
But having said that, we can't go around pissing everyone off either.
Yeah.
But I think, Trump's sort of overplaying his hand. For him to sort of directly threaten, where I thought Hogan had a point, he said, look, it's in everyone's interest to maintain security.
Yeah.
So that's why I think they're bluffing. And obviously it's in our interest to maintain security. And I do think I'm not particularly pleased with the Americans using international security as a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
But then again, from their point of view, if we take their position literally, which is that any involvement in Huawei in the network fundamentally compromises security in and of itself, then they think that's a bigger security threat than sharing less intelligence with other English-speaking countries.
There has been some bluffing before, hasn't there?
Which one? Who's first?
Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, I was just going to say on the bluffing issue. I mean, the whole sort of sanctions against, Huawei that prevent it from, kind of buying components from US companies, and then every time there's a sort of extension of the ban, isn't there? A period when they're allowed to sort of carry on, and then it's supposed to come into effect.
And they keep kicking the can down the road.
And I think you've written a story before saying it looks like they're just bluffing, and
it does.
So there is a certain amount of that goes on, I think, in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And I still think, I don't know, anything could happen. I could be wrong, but I still sort of think they'll try and go for the type of compromise that they were going to go for last year before Johnson came in, when everybody was expecting them to say, well, we're going to ban Huawei from the core network, this sort of sensitive part of it, but we're going to allow it where it doesn't really figure anyway in that side of things. It does in BT's network, but they're trying to get it out.
Yeah.
And
it's also that's not where the money is either, is it?
It's not where the money is.
The money is in RAN and transmission.
Allow it to do the radio stuff, and where it is prominent and it's heavily used, and where if you did impose a ban, it would cause huge disruption for operators.
And from a surveillance point of view, let's say, for the sake of argument, that the Chinese state is able to appropriate any Huawei gear whenever it wants for its nefarious purposes. If it was just RAN, I mean, they'd have to be tapping like thousands of cell sites.
Well, I only believe what people who are in the technical know tell us, and because I'm not an engineer and I don't know how sensitive base stations are, but Jamie and I have been at dinners with people like Scott Petty, who's the CTO of Vodafone UK, who's described it in a lot of detail that's where the sensitive part, that's the bit you really have to worry about, is the core. And the base stations, you can, if one becomes problematic, you can easily take it down and get rid of it. It's like amputating a finger on someone.
Yeah, but how would you know?
The brain.
I'm just trying to imagine
how they'd know.
I'm just trying to
the other
hypothesize
thing,
what the security threat of having, if we assume that every American fear about them is correct, what the security threat is of having Huawei just in the RAN.
I mean, the other thing you've got to think about as well is that something like 60 to 70% of internet traffic nowadays is encrypted, and to break encryption is very, very difficult. It's not impossible. Okay, a lot of people have proved that over WhatsApp it's pretty much impossible, but the amount of encrypted data is only going up. So it's not only about the fact that you've got to intercept data on this base station, you've then got to decrypt data as well, which is, problematic in itself. Unless you've got access to quantum computing, you're not going to be able to do it very quickly. And then the other thing you've got to consider, and this is going if you want to spy on someone, you've got to know what base station their device is going to be connected to. Therefore, you have to know where, say, like you're compromising the O2 network. You've got to track back through their thingamabob. Their supply chain, so you've got to go to their warehouse and figure out what base station is actually going to be installed on that cell tower, and then you've got to get lucky enough to figure out that they're talking or they're sending data through that base station at that time. It's no good if you've compromised 50% of the base stations and they're sending sensitive information through another base station because you've had a mobile handover because they've walked down the street. So there's a lot of things that are factored into it. It's not simply a case of, if I'm going to compromise 9,000 of the 19,000 EE base stations, you've got to know that person is going to be on that base station, and you can decrypt the data coming through.
I mean, on that basis, one simple solution would be, okay, allow Huawei in the RAN, but not in any base stations near the House of Parliament or MI6 or
I mean, I'm probably massively simplifying the
as am I even more. But there must be workarounds. I think the point that we're all coming to is there got to be workarounds. Right now, you could argue that Boris Johnson's in an impossible situation, and I think it's incumbent on the Americans, because they're the ones making the demand, to find some way in which he can come out of it.
But on the other hand, sort of arguing against myself a bit here, there's a lot at stake here for the US, because the UK is arguably its closest ally. If they can't persuade the UK to completely ban Huawei, and to say like no Huawei whatsoever,
so they lose face.
They lose face, and what chance do they have then of sort of trying to exert? Because they're still apparently still trying to put pressure on other countries, not just the UK. They're going for countries outside Five Eyes that they see as allies. They want to
any sort of NATO-ish.
This is a sort of global campaign, so it'd be a big setback to that effort if the UK goes, well, okay, we'll do it in the court, but we won't do it in Iran.
The other massive thing to think about, which no one's really picked up, is that intelligence sharing goes both ways. The more countries, like the US probably has the best security intelligence on the planet, but it still needs to augment it with with information that's collected by other allies. Now, if it starts ending 5, 10, 15 network intelligence sharing relationships, it compromises its own insights and own national defence, because it doesn't have information flowing in.
Well, I think that was the underpinning of Hogan's point, and he's right. I don't disagree with him. Where I think his biggest misjudgment was to throw down the gauntlet to Trump like that. He's just not a bloke that you want to say, I bet you won't. Because he'll go, oh yeah. Yes, no, there is that. We're all independent. I think, what I hope they'll do is they will come up with something, a sort of classic fudge, face-saving diplomatic solution, where it looks like a win-win. So Trump's whole thing, his art of a deal thing, is about win-wins, isn't it? So it looks like a win-win where Americans can say we got them to more or less do what we want, but we can say we more or less did what we want, and each country can put their own spin on it. Yeah. And the only way I can see that happening is if there's still some Huawei presence in the RAN.
Well, what about them doing something like, this is pretty bad for Huawei, but if they said, where things stand at the moment is okay, but you're not allowed to introduce more Huawei equipment.
Right.
And over a period of, say, 10 or 15 years, it has to be phased out. So instead of getting rid of it in one go, it has to. So then operators...
They could always kick the can down the road.
Yeah, they're complaining about the cost and all this sort of stuff. They can kick it down the road a bit maybe and hope there's a change in the US administration that maybe goes back on things. But it's, I don't know, maybe something like that could happen.
I think smart money is on some kind of fudge.
Yeah.
The big issue is that the Americans don't evaluate the network in the same way that we do in Europe. Like you were talking about, implementing maybe sort of like, let's just make it generically Chinese technology outside the core. They don't recognise the dumb and intelligent parts of the network. But to an American or an American engineer or an American politician or regulator, so radio transmission and core is all intelligence. They don't separate into dumb and intelligent segments.
Yep.
Yes, that is an issue. So that complicates the FUD.
It
fudge
complicates that
for.
core radio fudge, which everybody was thinking they were going to do last year, and then it kind of got kicked down the road. Even though I still think that there's a good chance they do that. On the other hand, that's not the kind of, like Jamie says, it's not the kind of thing that's going to keep the US happy, because they just don't recognise that distinction. So
fair enough.
It's a really hard one to call, actually.
It
I
is.
just don't know how it's
It'll be
gonna go.
fascinating. We'll certainly have plenty to write about when the decision's made.
And it's supposed to be this month, is that right? Or,
yeah, by the end of this month, I think.
Imminently, I've been told. Very, very soon.
Yeah.
So soon.
Yeah.
This afternoon.
So before we go on to the final topic, just one other little story I wrote on the semi-related matter of Europe poking its nose in. They about 6 years ago, they had, there's just these countless directives and initiatives and statements and whatever sort of emanating from the European Parliament, European Commission, whatever. They said we need to try and only have one type of mobile phone charger, as they call it. What they really mean is the port, the data port, which couples as the charger. We need to only have one. And the reason is twofold. Firstly, environmental, because different kind of ports creates more e-waste, they reckon. And secondly, is for the sake of consumers, because it makes it more convenient for us not having to deal with lots of different wires.
I think that's a very reasonable point.
Well, I think... Okay, well,
the consumer side of things, I think it's very reasonable.
I think, I agree it's a minor faff to have to deal with more than one port, but I don't think it's a colossal faff. I also don't think they've probably consulted consumers. I think they're making an assumption there, and they're using that as a reason. But, fair enough, some people it might bother more than others. I don't think it's the end of the world to have a few different wires, or as increasingly happens, you get one of those little multi-headed ones. Yeah. But yes, I've no doubt that it would be better ultimately if everything just used one plug like you do with electrics in the UK. It's just although we have a different plug for the rest of the world.
More than anything
obviously.
Else, it's just a minor irritation. Like, for instance, if I was, travelling somewhere with Pierre and I go, I've forgotten my phone charger, can I have yours?
You can't use his because he's got a line. It's a ball ache. But whether or not Europe needs to get involved is another matter. And then the magic... So, go on.
Well, I was saying I think they do, because let's be completely honest, Apple isn't going to change without being told to change.
Well, that's at the core of my the reason I'm bringing it up. So the e-waste one I also question, given that every single device comes with a lead anyway. Mm-hmm. So I don't see how them all having the same interface changes that. Anyway, but yes. So your point of the market won't do it without being coerced by the state. That's the underlying bitch for me. And as we know, I'm very sort of in favour of the market just running its course if at all possible. And so they said 6 years ago they said this, and they decided to encourage the market, which I think is a very sort of shifty, sort of Machiavellian term. And now they've concluded some little directive saying...
At least they say incentivise.
Yeah, well, there we are. Well, that's probably next. Oh, no, I think they're just going straight to force. So they've just decided that the market didn't respond to this encouragement enough. And so now it needs to be forced, or at least that's the proposition by some bureaucrat or other. And I think I've got two problems with that. Firstly, it's just a pure philosophical involvement in the market in that way thing I don't approve of. And, to answer your question, Jamie, I think the market is headed that way naturally, perhaps not at the speed that Europe wants. But I think, Pierre, I don't know if you know, I'm sure I read somewhere that some new iPads have got USB-C rather than Lightning as their connector.
I think the new iPad Pro does. Yeah.
Right.
I think they're slowly going to go... I think 2021 is when they'll drop the Lightning port.
Right. So if we accept that USB-C is the ultimate destination. Yeah. Now a lot of older phones, maybe even your phone there, has still got micro USB.
No, that's USB-C.
Yeah. That's his is USB-C, is it? Yeah. Okay, mine's USB-C. But older and cheaper phones are probably still micro USB, but it will percolate through to the whole range eventually, and Apple seems to be getting on board. So that's my counter to the market wouldn't do it anyway.
I don't know. Argument. Yeah, but I mean that's as far as you don't know that.
But I'm saying that the actual evidence that we can see before us is that that's the direction of travel.
Yeah, but like you said, the nudge happened 6 years ago. So would Apple have gone that way, and would the market have moved this way without the nudge?
That's a good point. But that still calls into question why they now feel they need to escalate from nudge to coercion, because even if they're going to claim credit for doing it themselves. In fact, this is the rather cynical conclusion I came to in my piece, and then I'll move on because it's only a little moan. Is that I think they're ramping up their direct involvement and insisting, in the knowledge that the market's heading that way anyway, and then when it all happens, they can claim credit for it. That's my cynical take on the whole thing. But yes, I just think butt out. It wasn't a big enough deal in the first place for them to get involved, and anyway, things are heading that way. So why don't you just shut up, Europe? Okay,
you love Europe.
I love a bit of Europe. Well, like many leavers, I'll be defensive and say I love going to Europe. I love a bit of camembert, bit of parmesan, bit of chorizo, whatever.
You
just don't like
sometimes.
I like Pierre. Although he's gone a bit native, hasn't he? He's
native.
He's even started drinking real ale.
Exactly.
And pale ale.
I just don't like the institution of the European Union. That's all. Anyway, okay. So the last thing is, Jamie, you wrote a story which kind of surprised me. Not surprising me because it was anything other than your excellent standard of writing, but it got a ton of reads this week, and all it was talking about a new sort of set of tariffs and bundles and packages coming from Verizon in the US. So why don't you tell us a bit more about that, and we'll see if we can work out why so many people seem to care.
Well, it's just, it's convergence, and I personally think I'm a big believer in any company which doesn't have a diversified offering, and that isn't creating bundles.
If you want it, I've got a picture of it here.
And isn't creating bundles for consumers, they're going to be second-tier operators in the future. So if you're a pure-play mobile operator, if you're a pure-play content, content I'm taking out of the equation, actually, sorry, that's bad. Pure-play mobile or pure-play fixed, I think you're going to be, you're in big trouble. Like the market is moving towards bundling and convergence. And
even Sky's got into 5G this week.
Yeah, but they're converged anyway. They're a converged player anyway because they've got content and fixed, and they've had an MVNO for quite a while. So they're
an ISP for an even longer.
Yes, yeah. So they're in this. We're selling.
They got
we're
the memo.
Multi-playing. They've been doing it for years. And now Verizon, although they have been doing it, they've come up with a very interesting convergence play, which numerous people have pointed out that it is quite expensive, but
it is anyway in the States.
It is anyway, and it's
still
Verizon is a premium service. Someone pointed out to me and said, Comcast, if you get Comcast and YouTube, it's about X amount cheaper.
Right.
And I was just like, well, okay, is it any good?
Yeah.
We pay for better services here because you get a better service.
Yeah, but they're not yet doing a mobile service with it.
So you get discounts if you are. So this is where it's a genuine convergence offer.
Yeah.
Is that you're incentivized to get a mobile offering as well because you get a $20 discount per month. If on all of those, on the bundle for those services, if you're a wireless customer as well. So it is incentivized to be a mobile customer as well, and for mobile customers to consider these offers.
Yeah.
But the great thing is it's tiered. You can it's called mix and match. You start off with your internet.
Fios, is that how you pronounce it, or is it Fios?
I've always said Fios, but
So that's their consumer brand for their general bundling, is it? Fios?
No, that's just what they call
service,
their internet products.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not a brand; it's a product. So it's Verizon Fios.
Right. Okay.
So you select your internet product. Then, if you want, you select your content product. Then, if you want, you select your landline product.
And it's mix and match, as the name strongly implies.
And then at the bottom, you say, "I am also a wireless customer." Bam! There's an extra $20 off your bill. So it incentivizes. But one of the most interesting aspects of this is that it's not a 12 or an 18-month contract. This is a month-by-month payment plan.
Right.
So you can actually scale up and scale down on different products every single time. You can end it within 30 days.
Yeah.
So it's taken away. It's just a really unique approach.
Yeah, and so they're bringing that sort of Now TV philosophy to the broader bundle. Where, like, for example, we started subscribing to Now TV 2 or 3 years ago for Game of Thrones, and we've been able to, all the Netflix philosophy, and we've been able to duck out at any time over then, and we haven't.
But the different thing with this is that, so I was Now TV, and I really enjoyed the scale up, scale down on Sky Sports.
Okay.
So
yeah.
for the cricket, for the Ashes last year, or for the World Cup, sorry, I bought a Sky Sports package for the 2 months that the Cricket World Cup was on. But then I got rid of it afterwards.
How much that cost?
I think it was like an extra £15 a month or something
That's
like
not
that.
bad for a full World Cup action, is it?
Yeah. But that was only for the cricket channels, if I remember correctly.
And think how much you saved not having to go to the pub to watch it.
But then, got a load of booze in at home instead.
But then the difference with that is that Now TV, their internet offering is a 12-month contract. So if you get a bundled offer with Now TV, you can scale up and scale down on all the content, but you're tied into a long-term contract.
I hear you. Whereas absolutely everything is just month on month.
Everything is monthly paid there, which is a really, really interesting approach to take.
I think it is. I agree with you. And just looking at prices, I'm looking at the rate card that you put in your story. So just the ISP, just the broadband bit, you got $40 for up to 100 megabits per second. You got $60 for up to 300, and you've got $80 for gigabit. I wonder what their advertising standard rules are.
Yeah.
I wonder how often you get 100 for your $40.
It's not the same as in Europe, where you got to give mean speeds during peak time hours and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There isn't even an asterisk next to it, implying that they could just say what they want.
So when I bought my broadband package recently, I had to buy. I bought from the post office, and I'm guaranteed between 35 and 40 megabits per second during peak hours. So I think that's obviously a much more. I think we're far more advanced in the transparency of internet products here, but that isn't still not awful pricing. I mean, if the US is that extortionately, it depends obviously.
Well, I mean,
that's
the pure ISP thing. But yeah, no, it's not ridiculous. I mean, what is that in UK money? It's about 30 quid. You wouldn't expect to pay a lot less than 30 quid for a decent connection here. The telly bit,
mine is £22.50 a month.
Right.
So that's £22.
And you're
a month.
have you done a speed test on it to see what you get normally?
Never had to.
No, but just out of curiosity.
No, I haven't actually.
You're probably getting
done
about
a speed test.
You're probably getting about 30 meg or something.
Yeah,
like
I've never had to worry about it being too slow.
Yeah, quite.
You know.
So, but with the telly, it's a bit different. So we've got they got this thing where you can pay $50 a month for 125 plus channels. So that's obviously a lot of channels, but I bet most of them are shit.
They do charge a lot for TV out in the US, don't they? It is just expensive.
Well, $50 when you consider like Netflix. What was it cost me? £8 a month.
Channels,
TV probably
remember
$8.
Those?
And so I'm paying £16 a month for premium if we don't count Amazon Prime. Suddenly going up to £35 or whatever that is.
It depends. It depends what's included, because that's not completely dissimilar from Sky.
Yeah.
I suppose so. Fair
Not
point.
completely.
Fair point.
But it just depends what's included, because like is ESPN Sport, for instance, included?
Yeah.
And obviously,
can you watch NFL and all that sort of thing? Yeah, fair enough. And then then this scales up all to the most Fios TV, 425 channels, kick back with the best sports and music channels. So this is the all-in one, $90 a month. So we're saying 60, 70 quid. Which as you say, you can pay that much for Sky as well, can't you?
I bet that's the top Sky subscription's about.
Okay, all right, then it's
I
equivalent.
so.
It just seems like a lot.
I think we were paying a lot at one time, and then thought, why are we doing this years ago?
Yeah, I think that's equivalent to Sky. But their big thing. I mean, if you have like the phone lines was expensive.
Yeah, it's 20 quid.
You have to pay for phone lines. I mean, over here you don't have to pay for phone lines.
You do.
What's that?
If you've got, you definitely, that's part of the BT.
Well, minutes are usually. Well, you pay line rental, but
rental,
minutes are all included and all that sort of thing.
Well, it's amazing how often you fall outside their bastard scheme, though.
But then, if you have a look at their mobile, is expensive as well. So it is.
Still use your fixed phone.
Well, sometimes. I mean, like, for example, like my in-laws
Yeah, right.
are quite old, and they're a bit
Well,
old
I
school.
call my parents on their fixed phone.
Yeah.
But we don't use our own one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So
I don't get it. Do your in-laws live with you?
yeah, that's why I ring them up anyway.
Well, wait. So why do you need? Can't you call from your mobile phone?
Yeah, I know, but sometimes when you
call the
get
phone.
some sometimes proper old people just get a bit like freaked out by mobile phones.
It's those confusing numbers at the start. It's like
Yeah.
they expect a certain
Oh wow.
formula. It's like, what's going on?
So yeah.
07. Oh, I'm not picking that
Yeah,
up.
exactly. It's like 07, what?
Wow.
So just one other thing before we sign off, because we're nearly at about an hour, I think. Jamie, I gather another reason this is innovative is just convergence, as we know it, sort of multi-play, is a relatively new thing in the States. Is that correct?
Well, it's not massive because, I mean, one of the reasons is you don't have that many converged operators out there. You know,
Right.
you look at Verizon, it does have Fios, but the Fios footprint isn't actually that widespread across the US.
Yeah,
Okay.
Same goes for AT&T,
yeah,
I think, with its footprint. It's only in certain areas. So.
Yeah, they're not big. You know, you look
Yeah.
at the big internet players out there, and it is Comcast. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who the other ones are.
And they're just about
There's
to
been so
launch.
much convergence, it's hard
Yeah.
to know these. Altis, you know.
Yeah,
And Comcast is about to launch Peacock. Because
right,
Comcast owns NBC Universal, doesn't it?
streaming thing. But because they don't have that many converged players in the same
Right.
way that we do, or Europe does. You know, you look at
T-Mobile
T-Mobile
and Sprint don't have anything,
Sprint,
do they?
they're
Yeah.
pure play mobile.
Yeah.
You know, so this is one of the first big drives towards
Okay.
convergence. I mean, convergence is, we've never been able to nail it in the UK. You know, Halo is a big push towards it. Vodafone are trying it with their own deal with City Fibre. Three are pushing towards that market with their fixed wireless access proposition, but we've never really nailed it properly. I mean, O2's they've always denied it, but it looks like they're trying to make some moves that direction as well. If they don't, I think they're absolutely screwed. But Europe, a load of them, they're
Right.
all, the majority of them are converged players, and Orange have just shown that it really, really works. It
Yeah.
reduces churn, it increases ARPU, it reduces the number of points of contact for for customer services. So you can keep, you know, if you've got 500 services with 500 customers, it's going to be a lot more difficult to keep them all happy than 500 services with 200 customers.
Yeah.
You know, you can reduce you can focus customer services.
Actually, it's
Cut
interesting.
costs. Cut your costs as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, basically, yeah. I think it's
The back end sort of admin stuff.
it's a sound business strategy.
What,
Really sound.
what you just said made me think of my own personal circumstances, because I've been with EE on mobile for a while, and I've been with BT as the ISP for a
Yeah,
while.
same as me.
Yeah, but then I got annoyed with BT because they keep letting my sort of special deals lapse,
Right.
and then suddenly I'm paying 2 or 3 times more, and they just keep their head down and don't say anything. And I just finally got sick of it the other day and switched, funnily enough, to EE, just because they seem to be offering the best deal. So I've gone with EE, which is obviously
Same
owned by
company.
BT, and I'm paying less than half
Right.
of what I was paying with BT. And BT just never once, while I was a customer, you talk about things like BSS or whatever.
Yeah.
Never once when I was a customer just sort of went, "Oh, Scott, you know, we noticed you're coming to the end of your contract. You might want to stay on with." Mobile companies are better at this.
Yeah.
Like they know when you're coming to the end of a package, and they try and get you to hang around by upgrading your handset and all that sort of thing. They just didn't do it once. So anyone from BT, if you listen to this,
Yeah.
from as a consumer rather than as a telecoms journalist, you just there was no CEM
I
going on
find
at all.
it bizarre. People from EE phoning me up saying, "Do you want to switch from BT to EE?"
Yeah.
well,
I just find that very weird.
There's two things. So there's new Ofcom regulation in place that says they have to get in touch with you at least a month before your contract ends, because so many people were lapsing into increased payments.
Right. Well, I don't. Maybe they sent me an email or something. I just don't
But
remember.
this is something that's been developing over the last 12 months. So
Okay.
they're going to force service providers to get in touch with customers and tell them about first of all, tell them about when the contract ends, tell them about the options what will happen, and they have to suggest cheaper alternatives on the market. And then secondly, to your point about EBT fighting for customers, I mean, this was the biggest failing, as far as I'm concerned, of Gavin Patterson over his tenure at BT, is that they spent 13 billion on acquiring EE, but they never actually merged the businesses.
Not really.
So you've got two separate businesses operating, and this is where, if you actually have a look at what's his name, who's just come
Valera.
in. No.
Janssen.
Janssen.
Philip Janssen.
The CEO. Yeah.
So I suspect one of the reasons he was brought in was because his previous tenure, he oversaw, he was for some financial services company.
Yeah.
He
Well
oversaw
paid.
something
That's it.
like that. He oversaw a mega merger and integrating the two businesses there.
Yeah.
So I think if you look forward, you're going to have E and 3 existing as more of a single entity, because they're still two separate businesses.
Yeah.
I don't give a monkeys if Mark Allaire is CEO of the consumer business. They're still two separate
You've still
businesses.
got a long way to go.
And I can see the E brand disappearing over the next 2 to 3 years.
That would be interesting.
And everything exists under a single BT brand.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, just to finish off, so my personal experience, now that I've switched, so now I'm E on my mobile and my broadband, and I know that E is just BT or whatever. But
Openreach.
Yes,
An independent subsidiary of
independent. But the only sort of convergence benefit I get from it is that E chucks me an extra 5 gig a month data on my phone. So while I'm not sniffing at it, it's handy. Enables my son to watch a few more YouTube videos on the way home from school, because I usually end up gifting half of my data to him. That's not, as Jamie was describing it, that's not a full convergent offering. That's just a little bit of a bonus for using the same company for two different things.
I don't know. I mean, that's still I'd say a convergence benefit. Like, think about it this way.
It's something, but it's not fully converged. There's not one There's not one bill, for example.
Yeah. But it's still. I mean, it's a step in the right direction. I mean,
totally.
think about it this way: with this extra gigabytes a month, would you rather, if you were given the option, exactly the same price, two services plus the extra 5, or two separate services, but you didn't get the extra 5?
Of course,
you'd go. So that's all of a sudden
better than the kick in the unmentionables.
So that's convergence winning.
Yeah,
or get a kick in the unmentionables.
But my point is that you were saying full convergence, maybe Orange in France or whatever, isn't quite there, and that's an illustration.
Yes,
okay.
yes, 100%.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you very much for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.